Okay, great. We are here today with an interview for Perspective on Athletics that I'm very excited about. Someone I've known for a long time since he was a student athlete back in the day. Kenny Halpin is currently the Associate Director of Athletics for External Relations at Eastern Washington University. And he's been there for a period of time in a few different roles, and I'll have him talk about that in a minute. But we're going to be talking about one of the functions he deals with, which is the annual fund for the Eagles athletic program. And we're going to get his insights and his thoughts on the importance of the annual fund. Also, Kenny is a doctoral candidate at Washington State University, and part of his research is related to annual giving, and he may say a few things about that I found very interesting when we were chatting earlier. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Ken, thanks for joining us today and agreeing to do this interview. I think it's helpful for people like yourself that are practicing in the industry to share your insights, your knowledge, and your experience with others, because we all have struggles. We all have things that we want to get better at. And we all think that we have to know everything. And the bottom line is we don't. So we need to learn from each other. And that's really the whole purpose of these types of interviews that I'm conducting. So thanks for joining us. And if we can go ahead and get started, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got to the point you are at today.
Absolutely, and Mark, I appreciate you having me. It's fun to be a part of what you're trying to put together. I think it's incredibly valuable for the industry, for folks like myself, folks who have been in the industry longer than me, and folks who are entering the industry. As Mark described, I was a two-sport athlete at Willamette University. I made my start at the University of San Diego, where I played football, and then in my attempt to play baseball, they told me I wasn't good enough, and so I chose to transfer to Willamette University, where I could still play two sports. Maximizing my time playing was more important than the level that I was at. And obviously, I got a wonderful education at Willamette University. From there, I did my master's at Gonzaga University in sport administration. And my first job right out of that master's degree, I was the equipment manager for the community colleges of Spokane up here in Spokane, Washington. It's a community college district made up of 3 colleges, but the athletic department umbrellaed the entire district. And so I was a district employee for the athletic department. I was the equipment manager. It was my entry-level role. Was able to receive a promotion in that role, so I went from equipment manager to business manager, where I managed all of the payments, purchasing, budgeting process, as well as what was their booster club or their annual fund at the time. And in the small college role, my hats also involved events, equipment storage, and several other things that could eat up quite a bit of this interview. From there, I had a chance to sit down. I reached out to a gentleman at Eastern Washington University who was the director of development. His name's Tim Simonowski. He's now at the University of Hawaii. And I reached out to him just completely blindly and said, you know what, I want to be an athletic director someday. I believe the best way to do that is through revenue generation. I've got no direct fundraising experience. How can I develop it? And through that, it was literally an hour-long cup of coffee. And he said, just gave me some insights, some ideas on doing some volunteer work and getting involved in the community here, because there's always needs for fundraising. And through that connection that I made, a year later, he reached out to me when Eastern Washington University outsourced our corporate sponsorship efforts. He reached out to me and said, we need a person. It's a unique position. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely. So I made the jump from the community college to a company called KP Sports. KP Sports is our multimedia marketing firm, and so they're basically our IMG or our Learfield. They manage the rights for our sponsorship, and I was a KP Sports employee selling sponsorship on behalf of Eastern Washington University. I did that for about a year and a half. I was fortunate to be successful, and while I was doing that, I was calling on U.S. Bank for sponsorship, and went through a long, lengthy creative process about trying to create a corporate partnership between Eastern and U.S. Bank. And through that process, U.S. Bank happened to have a campus banking division where they're trying to partner with college campus ID cards and to put campus branches or bank branches on campuses. Because during that process, I should back up a little bit. I started my PhD at Washington State University, And that's sort of how I entered in that track, because I felt if I could generate revenue and have a PhD, I'd be a pretty unique candidate for an athletic director's position someday. Well, that skill set was also pretty intriguing to U.S. Bank. And so while I was selling sponsorship, they actually approached me about working for them in their campus banking division. It was a very intriguing opportunity to work in the private side of business, to work in the banking industry, and utilize what I felt was a pretty unique skill set for them. And I'm not going to lie, the salary was significant. And so I made that jump over to U.S. Bank. I worked there for about half a year, and I got to work on some pretty exciting projects, again, in the banking industry as they pertain to higher to college athletics. I mean, to university life in general. And I managed a 10-state territory on the West Coast. Well, through that process, after that departure, my current boss, Bill Chaves, our athletic director at Eastern Washington University, created a new position at Eastern, one that we hadn't had in the past, and that's the chair I sit in now. He opened the position. I applied for it, and knowing that what I'd always wanted to do was be an athletic director, and I was fortunate enough to be selected. And so I like to tell folks as we get into later, advice to career up-and-comers. It's important to me not to let my resume determine my career path. And so when I left the community colleges to come to Eastern, I took a pretty significant pay cut in order to take a chance at something I believed I wanted to do. When I left U.S. Bank and I came back to Eastern again, I took another pay cut. And it's something that wasn't a question for me. What I do right now, and what anybody who's interested in getting into this industry will learn, which you're always on. You're always doing it. You're always wearing your hat. You don't just leave it on the weekends or in the evenings. And it was important to me because I never regret going to work on a Monday, or I never dread it. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, how I ended up where I'm at today. So.
Yeah, I think that is non-traditional, unorthodox. I think that you were playing with it a little bit. You were in touch with some of the aspects of it. Then you went a totally different direction, and it actually led you back to athletics. So it's interesting. What you've touched upon is really the power of relationships, and I do want you to talk about that as we wrap up, and you talk about some advice for young up-and-comers as well. So I think that'll be an important piece. But in your role there, you manage a variety of different things. External relations on many campuses can mean lots of different things, but they usually all have to do with revenue generation, correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So this is the money-making operation, which it would include ticketing, which would include the annual giving aspect, marketing, sponsorships. Is that everything that's included, or do you have anything else that is under your umbrella?
That's absolutely everything included, as well as media relations. And what has traditionally been called sports information, we like to use the term media relations, but we also remind everyone in our department, everyone's a ticket seller and everyone's a marketer, because everybody influences our brand. And so, that's all the areas that flow up for external relations here at Eastern.
Yeah. Well, it's a very important aspect of any athletic department, particularly at the Division I level. But all of these types of things, as we all know, are trickling down to Division II, Division III, NAIA schools. The importance of revenue generation exists at every single level. So some of the things that you're doing or others are doing at the Division I level, we all try to take and tweak and make appropriate for our levels at in the small college environment. But it's all very important. So I think that, as you know, you probably have a lot of people counting on you to generate, and hit goals and that sort of thing. One of those areas that we're going to talk about today is the annual giving, or the annual fund component, which is donations and creating donors and relationships there. And I think it's a very, very important topic, especially for smaller colleges, because marketing and sponsorship revenue, ticket sales generally are not a part of the small college world as much. But the annual giving is something that everybody can do a better job at and work with their campuses to create a better program and really engage people and generate substantial dollars that will have an immediate impact on their athletic budget. So what I'd like you to do is talk a little bit about the importance of the annual fund and how you go about it, or your thoughts, and take us through why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, it's a great question, and a colleague of mine at University of Central Arkansas, his name's Ryan Holloway. He always refers to the annual fund as the lifeblood of your athletic department, and it's really so true because from a younger perspective, you really, as you're getting new into the industry, you need to understand that there's a difference between a major gift and an annual fund gift. And a major gift is defined differently at every university. You know, what we define as a major gift at Eastern might be a monthly gift at University of Arizona. I mean, it's really an economies of scale discussion. But really, an annual gift is something that's given every single year, some type of money that you go to, a donation that you effort to renew each year. At least that's how it is for us. And the biggest reason it's valuable is because if you get, the moniker, if everybody does a little, nobody does a lot, nobody has to do a lot. You have a lot of people, we're hoping for up to 1,000 that give a smaller amount each year to create a pretty healthy pool of revenue that we can utilize. And we utilize a lot of them to offset our cost for scholarships, but that's just how we use it. A lot of schools will do it differently. And then the other reason that an annual fund is so important is because it gives you a pool of people that you can develop a relationship and get to know and identify major gift prospects from. People that might have the capacity to give a major gift and just need to get more engaged with the university and in the athletic department and understand your needs as you grow. One of the biggest things that I've learned, and just for what we're doing, we're actually working on the discussion of rebranding our annual fund. So as you can imagine, I've spent a lot of time researching annual funds across the country and how they operate. And one thing I guess I'd share for today is there's a difference in levels and there's a difference in spectrums. And so first I'll talk about the difference in levels. One of the reasons our annual fund at our level is so valuable is because we're good at football. And the best way to have a strong annual fund program is to hold benefits hostage for certain donations. That's a very popular practice at the Division I level. Obviously, for BCS schools like the Pac-12 schools of, USC, UCLA, they're gonna hold the best parking spots and the best tickets hostage for a donation. Other stadiums, folks, they'll actually utilize the term of a PSL or property license for their seats. That'll help you get certain additions done into your stadium. It's a smart way to just identify revenue and grow your stadium. So one of the things that we do here at Eastern, and we're looking at really growing in our rebrand, is tying more tailgate passes, more parking passes, and more tickets to our annual fund, because football for us as a brand is about as hot as it's ever been, without a question. One of the biggest differences between the small college world and the major, college world, or at least even the mid-major, for us, it wasn't that long ago that ticket sales were not a strong revenue stream for us. Today, ticket sales is a strong revenue stream for us, stronger. The small college level, ticket sales are not a strong revenue stream. Parking benefits aren't going to be as enticing, and seating isn't going to be as enticing. So what you really truly have in the small college world is an annual fund based on truly philanthropic support for your program, people that want to give annually each year. And from my experience, a lot of that is going to be parents. I want to support my students, my son or daughter's experience while they're there. So you kind of have this 4-year window on average, or 2-year window at the community college with parents or folks. And then the other stronger element for that philanthropic support are your alumni, folks that went to the university and have some type of attachment beyond the benefit that they can receive. So there's really a lot of differences in level, and understanding where you're at level-wise is how you can really create a strategy to maximize because obviously it's about revenue. You're trying to raise revenue, and one of the things that often gets forgotten about, but we try to remind ourselves to discuss all the time, is are you ever making a sacrifice to raise revenue? There's certain colleges that could probably get a significant paycheck from a casino or a beer sponsor, but they choose not to accept it, if that makes sense. And so that's a little bit about the difference in the levels. And then at our level, we talk a long time about difference in spectrums, and it's a spectrum we've defined here, because one thing that as anybody gets into this industry and wants to get into fundraising, they're going to wrestle with what we call at Eastern our excellence funds. Different schools call it differently, but we have our annual fund, that big pot that we all donate to each year for that philanthropic support. But then football has a pot, and basketball has a pot. Men's and women's both have their own pot. Tennis has a pot. Everybody has their own needs that they want to go fundraise for. And so with this spectrum that we've created, on this side is, we always joke about it, is the University of Florida. And if I'm the athletic director at the University of Florida, I'm going to tell my volleyball coach, I'm going to fund you to the nth degree. You're going to have everything you need from a funding perspective. Your job is to coach. Your job is not to fundraise. So all the money that gets fundraised at Florida goes into one big pot. That's this side of the spectrum. The very bottom end of the spectrum on the other side is, if you want it, you go fundraise for it. We barely have a full-time annual fund person. We don't have time to fundraise for you too. And so if you need more, if you have needs beyond what we can budget at the beginning of the year, it's, you kill it, you eat it, if that makes sense. And then every school in the country, at least from my experience, the mid-major level or higher, where you can really define some annual fund benefits with parking and ticketing and whatnot, you kind of have a hybrid of that is how do we create a combined effort? Because as you can imagine, on this side of the spectrum, you've literally created competition between your annual fund and your different excellence funds. And it's a political conversation you have to have with each of your coaches. And so what we're working on doing specifically here is melding together, how do we create a joint effort to maximize the annual fund pot without leaching the excellence fund pots, and vice versa. So that's kind of the perspective, and I've talked a little bit about the reason or the value of an annual fund, the different levels and the different spectrums. And then obviously you mentioned earlier for the stuff that I do in school, the biggest thing I'm studying is donor constraints. There's a lot of research on donor motivation, and there's actually not a lot of research on, we can all study, okay, you gave to this university, why did you give? The research gap is sort of what they refer to it as. There's very little research on, hey, you didn't give, how come, why not, why aren't you connected? And so that's something in specific I'm studying quite a bit, and more specifically with the former student athlete population. That's a really big one for small colleges, and the reason is, I happen to be an alumni of Willamette University. I'm also an alumni of the exercise science department. That's the department where I got my major. But I'm really an alumni of the athletic department. I was a two-sport athlete, both football and baseball. I'm the target audience for the Willamette University Annual Fund. And that's the type of thing that from a small college is a really big difference, because across the board, former student athletes are the least likely to give of any subpopulation. And so it's a significant challenge to try and overcome but it's the most important challenge you can tackle on a day-to-day basis. Of course, that's my opinion, but that's because I was hired to generate revenue. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting, and I think you're absolutely right, especially the small college environment. We don't have typically the general non-affiliated community person that is a rabid fan and wants to, buy season tickets or give to the annual fund. You're dealing with parents primarily. You're dealing with alums if you can get them, and you're dealing with a few others. But it's very difficult to hone in. The other thing that those at the small college level typically have to deal with is the university or the college's Office of Development. And how are you going to work with them? And are you competing with them? And for folks that haven't done a lot of athletic fundraising, that sometimes can be a source of conflict. And it's difficult and threatening for the university or college's annual fund staff to start talking about athletic giving. And sometimes there's a process to work through there. What about for you guys at your level, Division I level? How do you or not work with the university's Office of Development and Fundraising operation while you're trying to do your thing?
That's an incredibly good question. Really, if you think about it, at Eastern we have roughly a $10 million budget, and our money comes from a couple of sources. We work with the institution itself. We're a state institution, so we work with the state side, and we discuss our needs, and they approve an allotment. So as you go through the list of these schools in the country, other than about 10 schools, every school receives some subsidy from the school. And that subsidy for us revolves around some state dollars and then some support from our students. And then the other side of it is just generated revenue. And so that's really the most flexible piece, because that's a piece you can go after and you can be entrepreneurial about. So then when it comes to development and raising revenue, who are your allies? And from an annual fund perspective, the Central Development Office can absolutely build or completely destroy everything you're trying to accomplish. For us, our university has a foundation It's a separate 501c3 from the university. Even though it works in conjunction with the university, it's legally a separate entity. Although it's housed on campus, it's employed by university employees, and it's the primary fundraising arm for everything we do at the university. We have an associate athletic director for development. His only job is major gifts. We define a major gift at, I believe, 50,000 or more. So he is only looking for those major gifts. He's not, if you have 10,000 and you want to give it to us, he doesn't have time to talk to you. That's an annual fund gift as we define it. One of the benefits for us structurally is that he has a report to the through the foundation. So he technically has a dotted line both to the athletic director and to the director of development for the entire university. And so he's treated like a major gift officer for athletics as one of the schools. We have a School of Business, College of Liberal Arts. They all have a development officer. He's our development officer. So that's one piece. The second piece is our annual fund. The gifts actually get processed in the foundation. So if you make a donate to athletics, it still routes through the foundation. So there's some natural structural synergies between athletics and the foundation. And then the most important piece, in my opinion, and I got a chance at NACTA to hear a symposium from several athletic directors, and the Duke athletic director, one of the biggest things he said is, I hear a lot of young folks who say, I would love to work in college athletics, I just don't like politics. His response was, then you're going to hate college athletics. It's literally understanding how to work with people to achieve a common goal is 99% of all of it. I spend probably 3 days a week. I'm in the foundation speaking with the director of alumni, speaking with our College of Business, major gift officer, our other major gift officers, and then our VP for advancement. So he's of the university president's 5 direct reports. Our athletic director reports to the university president, and our vice president for advancement, who is the executive director of the foundation, also reports to the university president. I talk to those two, my boss and his peer, the VP for advancement, every chance I can get, and I make sure that I understand both of their needs. But if I'm going to fundraise, I'm going to need the support of the university vice president for advancement. It's helpful that my boss and him get along really well. That's a big deal. I've spoken to colleagues at other institutions in our conference who said, boy, our director of development couldn't be more anti-athletics. And so as we try and fundraise for, improvements for our facility, I'm literally working against the director of development. That's a structural and political piece that's hard to overcome. But I would also counter that it's the responsibility of the person sitting in that chair having that issue to mend that bridge. And while it's not always easy, it's not necessarily impossible. So the personal relationship I have with the people in the foundation is probably stronger than any personal relationship I have anywhere else on campus, because those are the folks that can open the floodgates or completely create a dam for the flow of dollars in and out of our annual fund, if that makes sense.
It's interesting. It sounds like you're in a very similar situation to most people, that you need to work together. You need to figure out a way to work together. You're trying to do the same thing, and if you help each other, you can be a lot more successful than if you're defensive or battling against each other. Again, you're touching on a common theme throughout a lot of your comments about the importance of relationships and that sort of thing, and we're going to get to that in 1 minute. But the annual fund discussion that we just had, I think, was very useful and very helpful for those to get some perspective from somebody like yourself sitting in your chair and managing and trying to go through a whole rebranding effort now with your annual giving program there. But I want to shift gears slightly and see if you have some thoughts on leadership. And as you think about leadership in terms of intercollegiate athletics today and where the future is headed in a variety of different areas. But leadership is constantly talked about, and sometimes people define it in a variety of different ways. But I want to hear what leadership means to you and what you think is important for leadership in intercollegiate athletics moving forward.
It's a great question. I personally spend a lot of time reading about just that topic. And again, I teach a class adjunct at Gonzaga University, and I always encourage students to read books on leadership. Books on leadership are not necessarily books that have the word leadership in the title. I mean, you can read biographies that will share with you leadership. You can read marketing texts that talk about leadership. One of my, two of my favorite authors are Seth Godin and Malcolm Gladwell, and they write about thinking outside of the box and thinking about the future, not thinking about how the world operates today. And I take so much away from that from a leadership perspective than I could ever define. For me, what leadership means changes every day. I had a pretty, I always believe I've got a good idea of it, and then 2 years later I realized I was clueless. Where I'm at here at Eastern, I came into a pretty unique situation that redefined how I approach leadership, in that I've been in the industry probably 5 or 6 years now. I've been at the Division I level for 2 years. And now I manage a team of about 6 people. One of those people, our marketing director, has been our marketing director for 8 years. Another one of those people is our assistant AD for media relations, and he has been in his chair for 25 years. He's been the same person doing the same job at this level for 25 years. So when you talk about coming in and being in a leadership role with people who have literally got decades of experience on you in exactly what you're trying to do, it creates a tricky role. How do I maintain any element of credibility with someone I'm technically managing who was working on this before I had a driver's license? It's a fascinating perspective, and it's given me a lot of reason to sit down and really study what he does or what they do. And I guess my favorite analogy of how true leadership operates is, if you consider, a triangle of a hierarchy of how people operate, true leadership is flipping it upside down. And so it's the person in charge of any group or effort saying, how do I provide the resources and the landscape necessary so that the people I've been hired to manage can be successful? And so I can tell you, with our sports information director, I talk to him a lot about how I can, number one, get out of his way, because he knows what he's doing. He knows how to do his job. But then my job is to forecast the vision of where we're going. That's asking him, somebody who's done the same thing for 25 years, to adopt some new technologies and new ideas. Because when he started, he didn't have the internet, let alone Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And so we're trying to educate, well, what is the exchange of information look like 10 years from now? That's a big thing we talk about. What are we doing today to prepare for 20 years from now, when none of us will probably even be here? How are we putting Eastern in a position to be successful for people that will come after us? That's a big deal for us. And so I think from a leadership perspective, I talked earlier about the politics of maintaining those relationships with other folks. First and foremost, if you can have enough self-awareness to understand how you're being interpreted, and if you can have enough of an awareness to interpret not what the person you're communicating with is saying, but what they're meaning, because I hope everybody understands what was just spoken word for word is not necessarily what was meant. There's always intent behind everything, and it's not always easy to read. But if you can have some of that interpersonal awareness, that's where you can start to implement a word I use a lot, which is diplomacy. How can I move a conversation to a certain point without being a jerk, without being insensitive? Sometimes it's a lot of work to move a conversation forward and be cognizant of the emotions of every person at the table, but not having that awareness. Yeah, you can force some things through, but you're not going to have a lot of loyalty and a lot of credibility with the folks you're working with. But if you can show a little sensitivity to that, boy, you can go a long ways to get some things done through collaboration. And it's not always about what's on your resume, but the best things that come up on a resume come through collaboration, and they can be on 6 or 7 resumes, not just one. And that's something I always try to remember.
Yeah, and I think it's great. And again, you talk a lot about relationships and that. I think that's the people skills, and being able to provide some vision and forward thinking is the other thing I heard come through clearly when you're talking about leadership. But your last point was kind of a great transition to the thing I want to wrap up with, which is, there are literally, I think, hundreds of sport management programs, of sport administration programs across the country. And I speak to University of Washington class every summer, and there's a new group of students coming through each year. I mean, there are tons of people interested in working in college athletics, and there are only a limited number of jobs. But, and you yourself have taken kind of an interesting route to get to where you've been. But if you were to sit down and talk to a graduate student or a recent graduate, somebody that was looking to break in and find some way to get that first job or that perfect situation that they're looking for, what sort of advice would you give that person?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I took my little change over to U.S. Bank, I had a peer at the time tell me, you realize when you leave college athletics, you don't get back. Once you exit, there's no reentry. And I know, uh, you know, I can count just on two hands right now the number of people I know that have left it and have said I want to get back and can't get back, or haven't been able to. Sometimes it involves sacrifice, but for the most part, the reason I was okay with it is because I have a very high level of confidence in my ability to manage and maintain relationships, and I think it's one of the most important things. Um, One of the things I always remind graduate students, and I'm big on this, you see a lot of folks. It's a human trait when you're young. We do this a lot and we don't realize it. I give more attention to people who can do something for me. And the second somebody can't do something for me, right this moment, my attention diminishes. I don't even know that it's intentional, but I see it a lot. And so, one thing I'll encourage anybody is, you know, when you're trying to climb, when you're trying to go, I sat through that grad class having no clue what I was going to do, trying to find a job. And, today I hold the keys to some employment opportunities whenever a job comes up on my staff. Um, I'm going to be an athletic director. I went to class with a lot of folks that, to some extent, we just didn't connect that well, and not that I was any better than anybody else, but you're sitting next to an athletic director right now. Somebody someday is going to achieve that goal that you're trying to achieve, and they're going to be a peer. This is very much an industry of shared practices. If any of you have ever been to NACTA or have a chance to go to NACTA and see the amount of information being shared by competitors. I will literally go to a marketing meeting with six other folks from our same conference and talk about how we maximize our game day environment for a football game or a basketball game. Don't overlook the fact that everybody around you can someday be somebody who can help you. So it's a reminder, whether somebody can help you or not, invest the time to get to know them, which is the second point I have, which is get really good at asking questions about somebody else. It's easy to want to think about, here's what I've accomplished, don't you want to hire me? But whenever you get into a hiring position, no employer cares as much about what you've done as much as they care about what you can do for them. When we're looking to hire somebody who can fit our specific needs and can further our specific cause. A great, a great, a great thing to work on is sort of a strategy for personal interaction is see if you can't, when you meet somebody new, entertain a 15, 20-minute conversation without speaking in anything other than a question. Can you just speak in questions for 10 or 15 minutes? Can you really get good at inquiring about 360 degrees of a person or of a business? When you get into selling, if you ever have a chance to sell for sponsorship, that's the best thing to do is understanding how somebody else operates. That carries over in people relationships. And then my biggest one that I lean on is advancing professionally, and this is any career. You can get pretty far. I believe I've learned, and I don't claim to be that old, but you can get pretty far just if you simply do the things you say you're going to do. You'd be surprised how far you'll get. And I always try and coach folks that if you get good at, I mean, it's hard. We get tempted to want to overpromise certain things, and then you say, yeah, I'll do it, yeah, I'll do it, yeah, I'll do it. And then of the 10 things you said you were going to do, only 7 or 8 got done. And again, to some extent, I think education, the K-12 system emphasizes, well, B's and C's still get degrees. And so if I just get most of it done, I'm okay. But if you really, truly, if you say you're going to do 10 things and you get 12 done, if you do the things you say you're going to do, that's going to put you in the top 10% of all of your competitors in industry. And if you can manage that piece, then climbing professionally, you really narrowed yourself down to 5 to 10% of the industry of peers and colleagues trying to do what you're trying to do that are going to be measured not by doing the basics, doing the things they say they're going to do, but trying to overachieve, trying to create things and redefine the industry in ways it hasn't been redefined yet. That's where you start getting into the fun stuff. But when you first get out, you'd be surprised how many, not only of your colleagues climb because of things they're accomplishing, but how many maybe drop out because they think it's okay just to do enough to get by and don't realize the value seen in just simply knowing the fact that when I ask you to follow up on something, I don't have to wonder if it's going to get done because you know quickly the people that are going to follow through and do the things they say they're going to do. So That'd be my biggest piece of
Yeah,
advice.
and I think it's great advice. I think those are the things that people in leadership positions, management positions, they notice. And they certainly notice when somebody stands out in a positive way, and they absolutely notice when somebody's not living up to what they say they're going to do. And I think distinguishing yourself is great advice for any up and comer or somebody looking to break in. And I think the other thing that is important is to find your value and make yourself valuable. You know,
Hmm.
people need to know that they can depend on you, but it's up to you sometimes to figure out what it is that
Yep.
a program or a department or a staff person needs, and you make yourself the person that gets that thing done. And
We have a term for that here. We call it value add. It's
yep,
yeah, you may be hired to do a job, but literally I can find quite a few people to do the things I know need to be done. If you really want to stand out, do the things we know need to be done and then add value.
yeah,
Do something above and beyond that maybe we hadn't thought about, or maybe we thought about, we just didn't have time to get to. That value add goes such a long ways. And you're not going to be given directions.
yeah.
You're
No,
going to have to make it up as you go, which is the fun part.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's great advice in an ever increasingly competitive job market for collegiate athletics. So, Ken, I think I want to wrap this up. I really appreciated the chance to visit with you and have you talk a little bit about your world and what you're doing these days and how you got there and what you feel is important. These types of interviews, I think, provide so much valuable information. Like you said, this is an industry of sharing where people are constantly talking to one another about how are you doing this, how are you doing that. So even the ultra competitive world of college athletics, we all need to stick together and share so that we can all do a much better job, because after all, it's about the student athletes that are participating in a program, and that's why all of you have jobs to begin with. So I
Hmm.
think it's a great opportunity to visit with people like yourself, to share your insights and advice and thoughts on where the industry is going, and wanted to just give you one last shot to say, is there anything you wanted to wrap up with before we close this interview?
I appreciate you reaching out. This is fun, and and I think I mentioned to you earlier. I hope to be able to offer this value someday when I've really accomplished some things, and maybe I can give something back. But just feel free as you continue to, communicate in your vision and with what you're doing here. And if anybody does happen to watch this and think it's valuable, please call me, email me. If I can ever help out anybody who's interested in this, if I can have a chance to just chat with 5 minutes, I'm happy to give recommendations, thoughts, calls, anything, and pay it forward. I'm only here today because a couple of folks did that for me back when I had done nothing yet. And you have to start doing some things before you can start elevating, and it takes that help. So I'm always accessible. I appreciate it. And if you need anything else from me, just let me know.
Well, that's great, Ken. I appreciate it. And I will make sure that your contact information is listed when I post this to the
Perfect.
website as well. So, again, thank you. Ken Halpin, Associate Director of Athletics at Eastern Washington University. Thanks again, Ken. Have a great week.
Anytime, you do the same.
All right.